Young Deepwoken lore god clocking back in once again for another breakdown video on the lore within Deepwoken. This time I'll be exploring one of the most requested factions within the game, the Ignition Union. The Ignition Union delve as deep as they can into the heart of the depths, resolving to burn anything that crawls out. They're as patriotic as can be, but there's a whole mess of backstory, motivation, and relationships lying under the hood here. The Ignition Union are hypocrites, but they're damn good at hiding it. However, we don't take things at face value on this channel, and thus today we'll be blowing up their PR campaign and exposing the Union for the liars that they are. Watch to the end, because I've got a reveal that'll blow your mind. Remember to subscribe and like the video. It's a new year and I'm aiming to break all the records. The bigger we get, the more lore you'll get. It's a win-win as always. Also, be sure to join the community Discord. We have an in-game guild and we're planning projects like a complete document of all the lore in the game. You can use it to shoot theories my way if you have any. Link in the description and in the pinned comment. With all that out the way, let's get straight into dissecting the Ignition Union and their manipulative patriotism. Now, the Ignition Union, they're one of the factions within the Deepwoken world that keep a fairly low profile compared to hulking giants like Etria and the Central Authority. In fact, you wouldn't have seen their influence anywhere on the surface world except Summer Company, before Miner's Landing was implemented into the game. Now, mentioning Summer Company may feel slightly out of place. What does the Summer Company, a freelance merchant company, have to do with the Ignition Union? Well, to put it bluntly, the company has resources that the Union soldiers at Miner's Landing desperately need. You see, the Ignition Union are tinkerers of sorts. While other factions rely on magic from the depths or vows to keep their people under lock and key, the Ignition Union could not be more different. They're patriotic and inherently socialist. Yes, a Deepwoken faction is based on the ideals of Karl Marx. I'm not joking either. They're described as classless by Deep Delver Gamma, and it's also pretty evident in the name. They're a union. Regardless, the Union also defies expectation in the means by which they progress, which I hinted at earlier. The Union relies on physical inventions and experimentation, hitching their success on technology rather than working the song to death. You can see the results from these inventions in the Ignition Deep Driller, a literal drill that can rescue the player from floor 2 if the proper steps have been completed. They're also not opposed to experimenting on the creatures of the depths, as they've created the monstrosity known as the Megalodon, which I just killed in the background footage. In case you didn't know, these things are sharkos with a Gatling gun on their backs. How cool is that? These Megalodons were prematurely activated by attacking Summer Company mercenaries, and now they patrol the insides of Miner's Landing, jumping anything that moves. Now, Miner's Landing is actually built on a landmass with an ancient history, the Saramade Hollow lying deep within. I won't get into that now since it'd be too much on your plate, but let me know if you'd like me to cover that in a separate video. Regardless, we now understand that the Ignition Union is an invention-heavy settlement that has problems with the Summer Company because they want to take their materials by force. But why? What's their end goal with these inventions? Well, let me explain. The Ignition Union's shenanigans above ground are essentially all preparation for their expeditions underground, within the depths, that is. They're the main force when it comes to depths exploration, establishing a large base of operations in the first layer and having developed the majority of advancements within the second layer. Now, those words may be ringing some alarm bells in your head because, well, the divers are meant to be the main force of depths exploration. Well, it's complicated. In fact, the depth as a whole is the site of a power struggle between the divers and the Ignition Union. You see, the divers in the Union are at the forefront of depths exploration. This naturally places them at odds with one another, as they rush to be the first to make large breakthroughs that will aid humanity. However, the faster they race, the further their motivations are drawn into question. The struggle for power between the divers and the Union is etched on every inch of both layers of the depths, from the Black Diver Akira's massacre of an Ignition Union exploration party to Claris's scathing remarks about Ignition Union progress in Layer 2. It's clear that neither party will budge, but this is a video about the Ignition Union, so let's refocus on them. The Union largely hinges their reputation on being equal in status throughout. In fact, I've drawn a connection that speaks volumes out to the Ignition Union's modus operandi. This is the blindingly obvious notion that the Union has refused to touch New Kirsa with a 10-foot pole. Well, everyone who travels to New Kirsa either dies or never returns, so they're looking out for their members, right? Like a union. Perhaps that's how it seems at face value, but let's not forget the elephant in the room. The entrance to New Kirsa is being guarded by the Black Diver who effortlessly slaughtered all of his comrades, this of course being Chaser. When you also factor in the means by which the Ignition Union travel to the second layer, literally drilling downwards rather than using a light hook like Claris, it becomes clear that the reason the Union haven't breached the second floor certainly isn't out of the kindness of their own hearts. Now let's take our skepticism further and dismantle the Union's fork superiority complex. For starters, the Union brand themselves as ultimately superior compared to the divers in both means and morals. This is simply false, end to end. Not only does the Union's reliance on technology lead to atrocities like the Megalodon, but it's also visibly limiting them from exploring as deep as the divers have. Of course, the divers certainly aren't getting anything done while Aetheron mutilates their corpses, but just from an advancement standpoint, at least they've reached the second floor. This just leaves the morals, and while the Union brand themselves as classless, this ultimately doesn't mean anything when you compare them to the divers. If you've watched my video on the lore behind all the enemies in the second layer, you'll know that I don't feel favourably about the divers' means by which they explore the depths. They throw manpower at the wall until they progress through brute force, which often ends in insane casualties. Regardless of how they slice it, the Union are haplessly the same in their disregard for human life. Whether or not you're the most moral company of all time, taking your men to the depths and having them map uncharted territory, all while they're being surrounded by eldritch horror, doesn't sound very considerate. Not convinced that the Union are just as bad as the divers? Well, take the tale of Epsy for example. Epsy, if you didn't know, is part of the quest that you take in order to obtain Arc Water, the Ignition Union's lone oath in-game. Now, what does the Ignition Union's only oath in-game involve in order to wield it? Oh yeah, just casually rescuing a child that has been left out to rot to death or birth countless alien parasites in the wilderness of Layer 2. The members of the Union who are responsible for Epsy don't push out into the layer attempting to rescue him, instead waiting for you to do it. The talk of the Ignition Union being one for all are meaningless, and they're simply the divers with another coat of paint. Now you may think that statement was the classic dramatic conclusion that I always draw to end the video, but I meant that literally. The Union are simply the divers with another coat of paint. This is the part of the video where I blow your minds. For those of you that don't know, the divers and the Union are both founded by the Authority. I'll let that sink in for a minute. Okay, you may be asking, why does the Authority fund two factions exploring the depths at the same time? Well, it's simple. Look at the way the Union and the divers interact. They're literally eating each other alive, and they're pushing one another to progress further. Think Coke and Pepsi. In order to maximize revenue, they have to beat their competition. The mere existence of each faction boosts their incentive to explore the depths until no stone is left unturned and no innocent bone is unbroken. The divers in the Union will work themselves to death until the layers collapse, twisting and churning against one another until they find themselves with no more souls to throw the barriers to their progress. Once the dust settles, the divers in the Union will disappear, indistinguishable from one another. In their place will stand the pure essence of humanity erected in greed, expansionism. I hope you enjoyed this video. I have a content week in the works, a whole week of daily uploads, so I've been putting a lot of effort into that. I hope you enjoy that when it comes, and to be honest, that's really all I have to say for now. Shout out everybody in the Luminal Accord Discord, you know who you are. You can join that in the description, like I said, pin comment, whatever. Thanks for watching, stay blessed, and stay well. I'll see you in the next video.